What's up lads, welcome to the first God Guide video of Season 6. As decided by my patrons in a poll, Sobek gets the honour of the first guide this season. If you want to have a say in who I cover in my next guide, check out my Patreon links below. So in this guide we're going to be covering both solo lane and support Sobek, since he's definitely viable in both those roles and sees played both consistently. We're going to cover Sobek's basic playstyle first and what he's all about, then all of his abilities in depth, what they do and the best ways to use them. Then items and builds, where I'll discuss what I think are the best item choices for Sobek, both in solo and support. And finally, we'll round out the guide with some general Sobek tips and tricks that you can apply to your games. Alright, so without further ado, let's dive right into Sobek's basic playstyle and overview. So Sobek is fairly typical for the Guardian class. He's one of those somewhat hybrid characters that can hold his own in the damage department, as well as being quite a supportive god. Thus he is viable in both the typical support role for Guardians, but also in solo lane, where his decent sustain and damage output allows him to compete with other solo lane gods. Sobek has a lot of displacement through his throw and his tail whip, and can also chase down kills with ease due to his ultimate. While Sobek does lend himself to being a bit more aggressive, he can also peel and defend his teammates very well too, so he's quite a versatile pick. Alright, so with that done, let's cover all of Sobek's abilities in depth. So Sobek's passive is incredibly simple. He gains 7 protections every time he hits an enemy with an ability or a basic attack. This stacks up to 3 times for 21 protections total and lasts for 6 seconds. So naturally, since this passive is not a percentage increase but a flat increase, it's more useful earlier on in the game. Late game where tanks have 200 plus protections, having an extra 21 is just a nice little bonus. However, early on in the laning phases and the like, having 21 protections basically 100% of the time is very powerful, and it's easy to keep stacked up as well. So yeah, usually not anything you need to be paying attention to too much when you're playing Sobek. But be aware that early on you're going to be significantly more tanky than most other gods due to this passive, which can allow you to aggressively tank waves and things like that if you want to do that. Alright, onto Sobek's first ability, Charged Prey. This to me is the iconic ability that everyone thinks of when they think Sobek. It's essentially a fairly long range dash, and if you hit an enemy during it, you stop and fling them over your head. The damage is pretty mediocre on this at 230 plus 50% scaling, but the stability is really not about the damage. The CC and displacement factor this ability provides is unique among Guardians. Not only does it disable the god you're throwing for a few seconds, it also throws them way away from safety straight into danger most of the time. Be that plucking an enemy out of their team and into yours in a team fight, or throwing them away from towers into your tower, it can certainly cause a lot of problems for enemies you hit with this ability. While it is only single target, it's very powerful to be able to displace an enemy this far. With it being a fairly slow dash, it does have its risks though. Given you dash forward quite a distance, if you miss this ability, you might suffer the same fate you intended for that enemy hunter, since you used your main movement ability and you're now stranded out of position. So be careful with when and how you use this ability. Sobek's second ability, Tail Whip, is a little bit more simple. You basically just spin to win and knock everyone in an AoE around you away a short distance. With him being a Guardian, the damage on this is again fairly low at 260 plus 40%, but the base damage is decent. So this is mostly just used as a small disruption in fights. It doesn't knock back anywhere near as far as Charge Prey does, but unlike the pluck, it can hit multiple enemies, and also works somewhat well as a wave clear tool, as well as the standard disruption in fights to stop or interrupt enemies casting and using basic attacks. It works especially well against channeled abilities that aren't knock-up immune, like the famous Bellona matchup where Sobek can easily tail whip her out of her bludgeon every time and stop the slam damage. This also works in numerous other situations, like Nike's Rend or Arceo's Life Tap. This notably doesn't work against all channeled abilities though, since many channeled abilities are either knock-up or straight up CC immune to prevent this, so like Thor's 3 for example. Sobek's third ability, Sickening Strike, allows him to attack all enemies in a wide cone in front of him, doing 220 base and 30% scaling in damage, and also healing for 60 plus 10% scaling for each target he hits up to 3 targets. This ability also applies 50% anti-heal to all enemies affected. So this ability is Sobek's main wave clear. While you do have to get side onto the wave most of the time to hit all 6 minions, it's his best form of clear since his 1 is single target and his 2 knocks all the minions away. Though usually to clear waves you will often use your 3 quickly followed by your 2. The anti-heal is the only other thing of note really with this ability. This does affect lifesteal and item healing, so if you're using it in a lane, it will have the effectiveness of enemy health potions and the like, which is actually surprisingly effective both in solo and support. And of course this is exceptionally useful against any healers the enemy team might have, which makes Sobek a useful counter pick against most healers. Especially combined with his large disruption, you can really shut down low mobility healers like Sylvanas or Ra by using Charge Prey to pluck them out of position and then immediately applying that anti-heal. And finally, Sobek's ultimate, Lurking in the Waters. Sobek dives underwater, gaining 30% bonus protections and 10% of his mana back every second. While underwater, it creates a large area around him that slows enemies, and after 4 seconds he leaps out and does 950 base damage and 80% scaling to all enemies in the area. You can also cancel its ability earlier for a reduced damage output. So this is probably Sobek's most complex ability as it has a few different uses. So of course the damage on the ability is nuts. Nearly 1000 base damage is crazy. Even if you build full tank and ignore the scaling, this already hits ridiculously hard at full charge. But it's also great for locking down enemies after they use their movement ability, or if they simply don't have one in the first place. If you manage to pluck someone, force their movement ability, and then ult, locking someone in that 40% slow allows you to full charge the ult, and also allows your team to pump damage in as well. This can even be used to peel, sort of. Slowing enemies so your team can escape, and also just the threat of dealing 1000 damage to someone can often make them back off. The mana regen on this ability is also extremely useful and often overlooked, I think. Sobek has very high mana costs and often likes to spam his cooldowns a lot to clear waves and things, so being able to regen 40% of your mana using this is insane for solo lane sustain, and it's useful elsewhere as well. Often in solo lane it's worth it to just use this as a wave clear as well. It seems kind of counterintuitive to use your ultimate as wave clear, but full clearing the wave and getting a ton of mana back is sometimes worth it in solo. Not really in support though, since your ADC can clear for you there, but it's definitely good in solo. It's also a great way to get your cooldowns back, since you have 4 seconds of being super tanky and threatening a lot of damage. You can wait on cooldowns while you're under the waters and have them back up when you return to the surface. Okay, so now you know his abilities, let's move on to Sobek's item choices and a full build example for each role. So given this is my first guide for Season 6 and it's only been out a few days at this point, the items listed here are either just good items for Sobek in general that have always been good, or they're based on limited experience this season. But with that being said, let's get right into Sobek's starting builds. So in terms of starts, for support Sobek it's pretty similar to Season 5 I think. Guardian's Blessing is still the go-to for supportive Guardians in the support role, and then for the most part it's either tier 1 boots and potions, or an upgraded relic and potions. With the changes to Gauntlet of Thebes it could be viable to rush it first now, but I still don't think it's going to be that great as a first item rush. As for Sobek, the go-to start most people are running this season is back to Warrior's Blessing on most gods. But I definitely think on defensive solo laners that often lose lane like Sobek, Guardian's Blessing is still viable. And from there you usually want to grab tier 1 boots and a Chalice of Healing. Mana pots aren't necessary in solo, especially this season because of blue buff and the Totem of Ku giving you plenty of mana sustain. Plus with Sobek you also have that ultimate to fall back on for the extra mana regen, so you should be fine with just a Hell Chalice here. Alright, so after starting builds, usually your first item is going to be your boots. Yes, this season you can sell these later on for a full item, but they're still incredible value early on for the cost and they're the best way to get movement speed. In support I usually like reinforced shoes on Sobek. Sometimes you'll miss a pluck or something and you'll be out of position, and having that extra defense and crowd control reduction I find is really useful. Cooldown and travel issues are also viable on support Sobek in the right situation though. I would generally avoid pen boots on Sobek. For solo lane, cooldown boots are the best choice straight up in my opinion. You usually don't need tank boots in solo lane, and pen boots are decent, but I think they're outclassed by the extra mana and CDR that cooldown boots have. Alright, so with boots and starting builds covered, let's move on to the rest of your items and what I think is good on Sobek before finishing up this section with some example builds. So I'll cover solo Bek first and then support Sobek. So in solo lane, you need your second item to be defense against your direct lane opponent usually. With Sobek, if you're laning against a physical, Breastplate of Valor is amazing. The stats it gives are all great for Sobek. He uses a lot of mana, so having extra MP5 and base mana is always great. Plus his ultimate is percentage based mana regen, so having more mana total means you gain more mana back from the ultimate. 20% CDR is just good on almost any solo lane pick really, allows you to spam your abilities more often, things like that. And of course the 65 physical defense is great for tanking hits when you're boxing your laner, plus it provides a little bit of extra defense against minions, towers and maybe their jungler as well. If you're laning against a magical god, Voidstone is my go-to second item defense usually. It gives plenty of health and magical defense to tank hits, plus a smidgen of power and that 20 protection reduction aura to help out your damage and wave clear a little bit. However, against a heavy healer like Hell, you will want to swap Voidstone for Pestilence for obvious reasons. Alright, so for the rest of your build, of course these 4 items I just listed still apply if you didn't buy them as your second item, you could buy them later on in the build. Spirit Robe and Mantle of Discord are great later on in the build for general purpose defense and the useful passives they provide. Hide of the Urchin is also decent as a third or fourth item if you're winning, and you can get those stacks easily. Megadia Mail is your go-to if you're having trouble with auto-attack focus gods like Hunters. If you're in desperate need of magical defense but don't want Pestilence, Bulwark and Genji's Guard are decent, but personally I do prefer Voidstone and Pestilence usually. Windblade can sometimes be a lifesaver against the correct comp if you're getting wrecked by slow heavy gods like Osiris or something. And finally for solo, if you want a little bit more damage in your build, you can also get Ethereal Staff later on. Alright, so onto that full build example for solo Bek. Start with Guardian's Blessing, Shoes and a Chalice of Healing with Teleport as your relic. Then finish your shoes into Shoes of Focus. Then get Breastplate of Valor against a physical lane opponent and Voidstone against a magical. Get the other in third slot that you didn't get in second. Then grab Hide of the Urchin, Midgardian Mail, sell your Blessing for Mantle of Discord, and if the game goes long enough, sell your boots for Ethereal Staff and get the Elixir of Speed. And for your second relic in solo lane, I usually like Sprint. Alright, so let's cover support Sobek's itemization before we finish up with some Sobek tips. So support Sobek builds some of the same items as solo Bek does, but not all the same. So all 3 aura items are viable this season it seems. those being Gauntlet of Thebes, Sovereignty, and Heartward Amulet. These are all very useful to your team while also providing decent defense for yourself as well. Spirit Robe and Mantle of Discord apply as just as they did in solo lane. They're great for general purpose defense. You usually can't go wrong with either of these on Sobek. Pestilence is of course always your go-to against healers as a support. Midgardian Mail is once again really useful against Hunters, Kali, Mercury, Bakasura, all those types of gods. And on the flip side, Shogun's Kasari is useful if you're the one with a lot of auto attackers on your team. Talisman of Energy is actually not too bad. I'm kind of starting to like this item a little bit more now, so if you want to try something different for your magical defense, you can try this out. Jade Emperor's Crown is sort of a replacement for Sovereignty. I think Sov is better right now, but you can try this. With 6 item builds, you may even have the space for both in the build. If you need even more attack speed reduction on top of Midgardian Mail, Witchblade is a decent option, but I would definitely prioritise Midgardian first. Emperor's Armor is great if you're either having trouble sieging down Phoenixes or if you're the one getting sieged. It can help in both cases to prevent enemy sieging and also make your own sieges easier. And finally, I'll quickly mention Magi's Cloak. This isn't something you should be building every game, but in certain cases where you're getting heavily focused by hard CC, you can grab this to keep yourself alive a little bit longer. Alright, so onto that example build for support as promised. For your starting build, in support you definitely want Guardian's Blessing, no question. Then get tier 1 shoes, 4 health and 2 mana potions. From there, finish your boots into reinforced shoes as I mentioned earlier. Then grab Sovereignty, Gauntlet of Thebes, Heartward Amulet, Spirit Robe, and sell your blessing for Mantle of Discord. And once again, if the game goes late enough, you can sell boots to get Midgardian Mail and get the Elixir of Speed. Alright, so that's how to build and play Sobek. Let's round out the guide with a few general tips and tricks to up your game. So this first tip is a little bit hard to execute sometimes, but Sobek actually gets a brief period of immunity frames after he hits an enemy with his dash. This can be used to immune certain CCs, so if for example you see a Ymir going to freeze you, you can pluck quickly to dodge the freeze, which can be useful sometimes. Don't be scared to ult a minion wave as Sobek. I know I've mentioned this before, but sometimes it is the correct play. For example, if you're low on mana and not looking to fight people anyway, you can simply get the wave and get some mana back to sustain up. Just be careful though, sometimes if you do burn this ultimate and get ganked, you could die. I know I've mentioned Sobek's 3 has anti-heal before, but a lot of people don't recognise that it affects potions as well. So try to hit enemy gods as well as minions in lane, both in support and solo. This will cut their potion effectiveness in half for a few seconds, so just a little added benefit when you do use Sobek's 3. And finally, none of Sobek's CCs are affected by diminishing returns or crowd control reduction effects. Since 2 are knockups and his ultimate is a slow that continually reapplies itself, so it doesn't really matter in what order or where you use his CCs really. Using your 2 straight after your 1 is just as effective regardless. Alright, that's it for me from this one. As always, if you did enjoy and learn something from this guide, then do leave a like and subscribe for more of these. They take a long time to make in comparison to my other videos, so any support is really appreciated. Suggest who you want to see next as well, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out, you nerds.